In this discussion, we'll take a look at some of the key factors involved with biosocial development as it occurs in middle childhood. So, first of all, what is middle childhood? That's roughly the time span between ages 6 to 11. And just a couple key points here. Usually during that time span, that's usually considered the healthiest years of the lifespan. Fatal disease and accidents are usually rare, generally speaking. And because things like genetic and environmental factors, those help actually protect and facilitate further growth and health. And also, additional protection, that comes from education, about, risks and vaccines and things of that nature. So carrying on this conversation, we'll take a look at growth and strength as it occurs, as it I guess progresses, you could say, during that time span. And so definitely good childhood habits. They protect later adult health. And that's usually influenced by the peers and parents, and that usually will have a lifelong type impact on the overall health of the individual. So a couple key points here, oral health is important. Muscles become stronger, including, heart and lungs. And, children, they start developing the ability to run faster and exercise longer. And also definitely increased skills, especially motor skills, will become evident in that time span as well. So one important thing to realize here in regard to development of the brain during this time span is definitely physical movement. That actually contributes to improved intellectual functioning. And the reason why is because, better blood flow to the brain. They call it cerebral blood flow. And it also facilitates increased amounts and growth of neurotransmitters. And which, facilitates, better cerebral functioning. And so a couple things to think in mind here, to keep in mind here are executive control. And so executive control, that means control of self-control of one's abilities to think logically, to reason, to plan. So that's what executive control refers to. Now, selective attention, that just means, focusing one's attention on things that one, either deems important at that moment or, are important to the scenario. And further, also there's, reaction time, so better cerebral flow, that actually results in increased reaction time, quicker reflexes. Okay, so shifting gears here, we'll take a look at, just a couple of health problems associated in middle childhood that may occur. And one important one here is obesity, and so I'm not going to read each of these, I'll definitely let you, pause the video and take a look at these and either make mental notes or paper notes, whatever you prefer. And but just keep in mind that definitely things like eating too much, especially sugars, is really can have a detrimental effect on overall health. And too little exercise too, especially these days, where young people, they tend to want to sit more maybe at a computer and play games, that kind of thing, instead of being outside exercising and interacting with friends and things like that. So just curious, what do you think about that? That might be worth discussing in our discussion forums. Okay, shifting gears once again, we're going to take a look at, some basic terms and concepts here regarding measuring mental abilities. And this just says measuring the mind. I think of it as, mental processes and abilities. And number one, an important key term is aptitude. And, some of you have maybe even heard of aptitude tests and things. And that refers to, basically, potential to master a specific skill or to learn a certain body of knowledge, type of knowledge. So that is referred to as aptitude. Now, taking that just a slight bit, in a slight bit different direction, we'll also talk about IQ tests. Remember IQ, that stands for intelligence quotient. And basically that just it was developed in the early 1900s, to measure intellectual aptitude or ability to learn in school. And usually IQ tests, they measure things, like verbal reasoning, verbal abilities, verbal aptitude, whatever term you prefer, as well as mathematical type abilities, aptitudes. And yes, so another thing too is originally intelligence was defined as mental age divided by chronological age. It's times 100. And that's how they came up with the term intelligence quotient. Now, just keep in mind, I don't think it's necessary to memorize that. I just wanted you to get an idea of how that originated, how they came up with that term originally. So I also included this chart here just because I just wanted to show you in general, in regard to IQ scores, the majority of us humans here that ever take an IQ test, we generally tend to fall right into what's considered the average range of intelligence or intelligence score, IQ score. So, that's roughly close 68, 70% of people will generally fall in there. And then, then looking to the right of that right here, you can see that there's a certain percentage and it gets gradually smaller as with people with higher IQ scores. I just want to also pause here and just discuss IQ scores because, these days, and especially in educational psychology and lifespan development psychology and things, developmental psychology, we don't put a lot of stock into IQ because what they've determined is, generally IQ tests and everything, they can be a little bit more geared towards a certain type of specific culture. Whereas it might, with people from other cultures who might not specialize in English or certain types of mathematical reasoning or something to that effect, they may not do as well, even though they may, still have, what's considered high aptitude ability. So something to keep in mind here. So a couple other terms here, the achievement test, that just means measure of mastery or proficiency in reading or mathematics or writing, science, or some other subject. So basically an achievement test that just focuses on one specific area there. And the Flynn effect, I don't think it's necessary to really memorize, unless you are in this field or you want to take this kind of study further. But the Flynn effect basically just refers to basically the idea that one's average IQ basically gradually rises throughout decades, in one's growth. That's all that really refers to. Very simple idea. Okay, and then also when it comes to intelligence, a couple researchers have come up with the idea and have proposed the idea that actually intelligence is more than just, academic in nature. So which they've come up with the term multiple intelligences. So this particular researcher, Sternberg, came up with the idea that basically there are three types of intelligence: academic, creative, and practical. And whereas um, this researcher right here, Howard Gardner, he's actually a contemporary. He's still alive, and he's very popular. He's written a lot of books on multiple intelligences. And so he took that a little further and he said, look, there's actually more types of intelligence than that. And he said there's basically 7 of those. And those are linguistic, logical slash mathematical, musical, spatial, and bodily or kinesthetic type intelligence, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. So, he took that a little further and said, look, people may specialize, or be more intelligent uh, in certain types of intelligences. So they may do, a little bit not as well in mathematical type, reasoning or skills, but they may be musical specialists or bodily kinesthetic, like in sports or something of that nature. So just curious, what do you think of this? And what are your thoughts in regard to these? Okay, and then looking at intelligences, and especially wanting to gain further insight into this, researchers have done things like brain scans on people to to see if they could actually see if maybe those with quote unquote more intelligence, um, that maybe they would be able to see that in brain scans. But basically, what they've determined though is actually there is no correlation between written IQ tests and certain types of. Uh, they didn't really notice any difference in brain scans with people who maybe did better in intelligence tests, than people who didn't do as well. So just to keep that in mind, that we can't, researchers have not really have noticed any uh, definitely brain activity or heightened brain activity, that kind of thing. As a matter of fact, heightened brain activity could be a sign of a disorder or intelligence. So the thing is, we can't just, automatically assume that from a brain scan, when we see more activity, we say, oh, that equals more intelligence. Demonstrates more intelligence when it actually could be a brain disorder. So we have to be very careful about those types of claims. And so I definitely want you to be aware of that, to give you a little bit further insight into that and to think about that a little more carefully. So neuroscientists, they have come up with a few conclusions as far as brain development goes. And that is, for one thing, brain development definitely depends on experience. And brain development definitely continues throughout one's life. Remember the Flynn effect that we talked to a little bit earlier, where intelligence just gradually increases throughout the lifespan. And then last but not least, children with disorders, they often have unusual brain patterns. And just keep that in mind. These are some general but important points to keep in mind. And, so definitely when it comes to diagnosing disorders in children who are in the middle childhood type life span of development, it's really tough. It's very complex, to distinguish between basically, what is typical childhood behavior and maybe, diagnosing a disorder. And so another term for this disorder that they mention is called pathology. And so distinguishing between that, just typical type behavior that occurs during that phase of development, or whether there's actually a type of disorder that we should be concerned with, it's very difficult to actually diagnose at that age. And so, as a couple things here, things like ADHD, autism, those are some things to keep in mind that, that researchers or specialists may look for if a child is experiencing some type of issues or something. But it's very hard, once again, to actually diagnose very accurately at that age, because sometimes that could just, their behavior may be the result of just certain phases of brain growth. So we're going to move forward. And another thing, about children with special needs, is important to keep in mind, that disorders are often comorbid and confused with each other. So first of all, I know a lot of you probably have never heard of this term, comorbid, and so that is, the adjective, that's the description type form of that word. But the noun form is called comorbidity. And basically all that refers to, it's a very simple idea. It's just the presence of two or more unrelated disease conditions at the same time in the same person. So all that means is one person may actually have two or more things going on, and that's called comorbidity. Now, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD for short, that's basically just a condition in which a person not only, they have difficulty in concentrating for more than a few moments, but also they can have problems just, being inattentive, impulsive, and overactive. So some of you, may have that, experienced that yourselves, or know somebody who, has, experienced some ADHD issues, and that may be something to pause and think about. And rates of ADHD, are a little bit higher in the United States, but they're kind of rising everywhere. And increases in ADHD diagnoses are worrisome for at least three reasons. For one, it just might be misdiagnosed. It just may, like I said earlier, it may just be the result of slow growth going on in the child or something like that, or just typical growth at that phase of development. And so the child may be misdiagnosed. And also, as far as drug abuse, that just refers to too quick to prescribe medications. Put young children on medications for ADHD or something when in actuality, they may not really need it. It's just, remember, these are broad generalizations, though. So some individuals definitely need it, and, they may be, not misdiagnosed. So just keep that in mind, please. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes normal behavior, that can be considered, pathological. That can be considered, to be an issue, when that might not be the case. So just, please keep this stuff in mind. Okay, a couple other, things we'll take a look at is, what is a learning disorder? And that's basically, a noticeable or marked deficit in a particular area of learning that is not caused by an apparent physical disability, by an intellectual disability, or by an unusually stressful home environment. So definitely, that's what it refers to is whenever you hear the term learning disorder. It's just an issue, a person having a tough time in a particular area of learning. So I'm going to move forward here. We don't have to worry about this here to the right now at this phase. Okay, we'll take a couple look at a couple other special needs here. One is called dyslexia, and those are just that just refers to issues with reading, and which might it's tended thought to be the result of some neurological underdevelopment, and and then there's another type of special need called dyscalculia. That's an interesting word. And basically, all that means is a difficulty doing math, and probably originating from a distinct part of the brain. So I know a lot of you are probably smiling, and you'll say, "Well, I must have that. I've always had, a tough time doing math, or something like that." I know I grew up thinking that as well, before I became serious, about, my education and everything. But this is an actual, special learning disability. And then autism, or Autism Spectrum Disorder, it's also called ASD for short. That is along a spectrum, so it can be everything from mild to moderate to severe, and everything in between. So autism, includes many symptoms. Sometimes children may have trouble speaking, or smiling. They will sit and play by themselves for hours, and focus on one thing, one object, or one toy, or one type of activity or something. Whereas, others who, may be experiencing a little bit of autism, or maybe on the spectrum, they can be very high functioning and extremely talented and strongly focused and have really good memories and that types of thing. So, but keep in mind though that those, who have been diagnosed with ASD, may, often, social interaction, is a problem. It's usually impaired. So just keep that in mind. Looking forward here. So, and when it comes to treating autism spectrum disorder, there are many treatments, but because each child is unique and is dealing with probably exists on a different point on the spectrum, that sometimes that it's hard to find successful treatment for that. So when it comes to these learning disorders or special needs or things like that, sometimes diagnosis and intervention, those often occur a little bit too late or not at all, and so sometimes early intervention, might not occur, and sometimes that parents or or caregivers, they may just say, let's just wait it out and see how the child develops, how it does, and everything. Whereas, sometimes early intervention is what's really would probably be the best approach. And then gifted and talented. That's always a kind of a hot topic, when I discuss this in class, with individuals, with students, because a lot of them will either have someone in the family, or they grew up, or they have children or something that are considered gifted and talented. So they usually have a lot to say. So I realize there's a lot of writing on this slide right here. So I highly recommend you pause the video here and just take a look at this. And this would be actually an interesting topic to discuss in the discussion forums if you have some insight or experience into this. So that concludes our discussion for this chapter, and I highly recommend you view this again. Make sure you take notes. and pause and stop on important concepts and everything, and just to gain an insightful understanding. And when you're ready, get your study guide for this chapter and answer the questions. And then once you have, then we can move on to the next chapter. See you then.